They left her out for not fitting their corporate aesthetic. They laughed, filmed her, but the next day she came back in a black car, dressed in power. This time she wasn't here for a drink. She came to sign layoffs and to rewrite the rules from the top. Welcome to the channel. Before we begin, give it a like and subscribe so we can keep creating stories like this. It was a warm morning in Palm Beach, one of those that herald the beginning of the high season. The Emerald Shores Hotel gleamed under the spring sun. Its meticulously maintained tropical gardens framed a crystal-clear swimming pool where entire families enjoyed their vacations. The scent of sunscreen mingled with the sea breeze, while children's laughter resonated throughout the complex. No one paid particular attention to the woman who discreetly entered from the side of the terrace, dressed in a navy blue swimsuit and a sarong with tropical flower patterns. Louise Montgomery walked with a tranquility that contrasted with the glances she began to attract. The first thing many noticed about her, before her serene face or her confident walk, was her voluptuous body. At 45, Louise carried her obesity with uncommon dignity, though she was accustomed to looks of puzzlement, or worse still, contempt. With a careful movement, she removed her sarong, hung it on an empty lounge chair, and descended the pool stairs. The water barely reached her shoulders when she noticed the first gestures of disapproval. Two young women, tanned and slender, began to whisper while pointing at her without disguise. A middle-aged man shook his head, visibly uncomfortable with her presence. Louise continued swimming, ignoring those reactions she knew all too well. Her moment of calm was interrupted when a man in a suit, despite the heat, approached the edge of the pool. It was Jason Sanders, the new customer service manager, hired just a month ago, known for his efficiency but also for his obsession with the hotel's image. "Ma'am, I regret to inform you that this pool area is reserved exclusively for hotel guests. I'm going to have to ask you to leave," he said, in a tone that mixed forced formality and barely disguised contempt. Louise, without losing her composure, responded in a clear voice, "I am a hotel guest, sir. I have every right to be here." Jason, far from apologizing, insisted, "Could you show me your room key or your guest wristband?" She searched in the small waterproof bag tied to her wrist and showed him a card. The manager looked at it with disdain. "This is not the current access card. I'll have to verify your registration. In the meantime, I ask you to leave the pool." What followed attracted the attention of everyone present. Jason signaled to another employee, a young man named Ernest, to help him escort the lady out of the water. Some people began recording with their phones, others laughed discreetly, enjoying the spectacle. When Ernest tried to take her arm to help her out, Louise stood up straight. With water dripping from her body, she looked directly at Jason and, in a firm voice but without raising her tone, said, "You've just asked the owner of the Emerald Shores Hotel to leave her own pool." Silence fell like lightning on the terrace. Phones were slowly lowered. Smiles disappeared. Jason instantly turned pale, while Ernest backed away, horrified. But Louise did not lose her composure. With elegance and confidence, she exited the pool under her own power, covered herself with the sarong, and, addressing an employee who had observed the entire scene with evident distress, requested, "Melissa, please call Sarah Watson. Tell her I need an urgent meeting." Louise walked away without looking back, leaving a trail of whispers in her wake. In the internal corridors of the hotel, away from the guest's view, the history of Emerald Shores was little known by the newer employees. Most would never imagine that this discreet woman, who avoided appearing at inaugurations and preferred to go unnoticed during her visits, was the founder and sole owner of the establishment. A businesswoman who started from scratch, facing prejudices since her youth, not only for being a woman in a world dominated by men, but also for her body, but who had built one of the most respected hotel empires on the American Riviera. In her office, located on the top floor of the hotel with a view of the Atlantic Ocean, Louise changed into a simple but elegant dress. After a few minutes, Sarah Watson, the administrative director and her right-hand woman for more than a decade, hurriedly entered. "Louise, they've already told me what happened. It's unacceptable." Sarah, a 60-year-old woman with enviable energy, had witnessed how Louise transformed a small family hotel into a respected chain. "How do you want me to fire him immediately?" Louise shook her head. Don't act hastily, Sarah. I want to know how that man came to occupy such an important position without understanding the fundamental values of this hotel. She approached the window from where she could observe the entire extent of her property. What concerns me is not the incident itself, but what it represents. If this happens to me, the owner, what must be happening to our guests who don't fit conventional beauty standards? Sarah nodded, understanding perfectly what she meant. For years, the Emerald Shores Hotel had distinguished itself by being a space where everyone was welcome, regardless of their appearance, sexual orientation, or background. It was part of the personal stamp that Louise had imprinted on her business. "I'll review his file and call a meeting with Human Resources," promised Sarah. "But there's something else you should know. That man, Jason Sanders, was hired directly by Edward Foster." Louise's face tensed upon hearing that name, Edward Foster, her minority partner and expansion director, a man brilliant in business but with values very different from hers. An old-school businessman who constantly pressured for the hotel to attract a more exclusive clientele. "I understand," Louise responded calmly. "So this is not just an isolated incident. It's a direction that some want to take." She turned to Sarah with renewed determination in her eyes. "It's time to make some changes, my friend, starting by reminding everyone who I am and what this hotel represents." Meanwhile, in the management office, Jason Sanders was sweating profusely while desperately searching the hotel database for any information about Louise Montgomery. What he found left him breathless. She was not only the owner of Emerald Shores, but of the entire Emerald chain, with hotels in Miami, San Diego, and New York City. Her photograph appeared discreetly in the Our History section, but he had never seen her in person, nor had he been warned about her occasional presence on the premises. The phone rang, startling him. It was Edward Foster, who was already aware of the incident. "Jason, we need to talk urgently. This could be a disaster or an opportunity." As he hung up, Jason couldn't imagine how what had occurred could be considered an opportunity. But Edward Foster had plans that went far beyond what anyone at the hotel could suspect. Plans that involved radically changing the image of Emerald Shores, even if it meant pushing Louise out of the way. What none of them knew was that the incident at the pool would be just the beginning of a series of events that would shake the foundations of the hotel empire, reveal long-kept secrets, and test not only Louise's leadership, but also her deepest convictions about respect, dignity, and the true meaning of success. News of the incident spread through the hotel like wildfire in the dry season. By nightfall, all employees, from gardeners to chefs at the gourmet restaurant, knew the story. The video, recorded by a curious guest, began to circulate in internal messaging groups before leaking to social media. The next morning, while Louise was having breakfast on the private terrace of her suite, Sarah showed her phone with a concerned expression. "It's everywhere," she said, sliding the screen to show her the headlines. "Businesswoman discriminated against in her own hotel because of her weight. The invisible owner, the woman who had to defend her right to exist in the space she created. Scandal in Palm Beach. Emerald Shores Hotel faces accusations of discrimination." Louise observed the news calmly, slowly drinking her jasmine tea. Unlike what many would expect, she didn't seem upset. "Perhaps this is exactly what we needed, Sarah," she finally responded. "For years I've avoided being the public face of Emerald Hotels, thinking that my image didn't fit with what people expect from a successful businesswoman. But all I've achieved is perpetuating the same system that discriminates against us." She stood up and approached the balcony from where she could see the ocean in all its immensity. "It's time to change that. It's time to be visible." By mid-morning, the hotel's entire management team was gathered in the main conference room. Edward Foster, minority partner and expansion director, had flown in from New York City as he learned of the incident. At 53, Edward represented the traditional American businessman, impeccably dressed, with perfectly groomed silver-streaked hair and a calculated smile that rarely reached his eyes. Next to him, visibly nervous, was Jason Sanders, the manager who had starred in the unfortunate episode. When Louise entered the room, Everyone stood up. She wore an elegant coral-colored outfit that highlighted her dark skin and wore her black hair gathered in a low bun. Her presence, far from being diminished by her voluptuous body, radiated authority and determination. "Good morning, everyone," she greeted in a clear voice. "I appreciate your presence at this extraordinary meeting." She headed to the opposite end of the table, where she traditionally sat during these meetings, but this time she remained standing. "As you may know, yesterday I experienced firsthand the kind of discrimination many people suffer every day in spaces that should be welcoming to everyone." Her gaze briefly rested on Jason, who lowered his eyes, unable to hold her gaze. "This incident has made me reflect deeply on the direction our company has taken in recent years." Edward cleared his throat. "Louise, if I may, I think we're magnifying a misunderstanding. Jason is new. He didn't know you personally, and he was simply following the guidelines of excellence in service that—" Louise raised her hand, interrupting him with a gentle but firm gesture. "Excellence in service, Edward. Discriminating against someone based on their physical appearance is your idea of excellence." Her tone, though calm, hinted at an unshakable determination. "What happened yesterday is not an isolated incident. It's the result of a culture we've allowed to seep into our organization, a culture that privileges appearance over essence." She took a tablet that Sarah handed her and projected a document on the main screen. "This is the new Customer Service Policy Manual, approved 3 months ago. Policy number 7. Maintain an exclusive image in all common areas, especially schools and restaurants." She slid her finger across the screen. "Application Annex. Staff must ensure that premium spaces maintain a select ambiance, politely discouraging the presence of disruptive elements." She looked up at her directors. "Disruptive elements? Is that how we describe people who don't fit certain aesthetic standards?" The silence in the room was absolute. Edward maintained a neutral expression, but a muscle in his jaw tensed rhythmically. "I never approved this modification," continued Louise. "In fact, this document directly contradicts the founding values of our hotels." Sarah, who had remained standing by the door, advanced with another tablet in hand. "We have conducted an internal investigation. This policy was implemented during your absence last quarter, when you were at the San Diego expansion. It was presented as a minor update that didn't require your direct approval." Gazes turned toward Edward, who maintained his composure but had lost some color in his face. "Understand that we all want this chain to succeed," said Louise, slightly softening her tone. "But I differ deeply in what we consider success. For me, it's not just about profitability, but about creating spaces where all people are treated with dignity." She paused, looking at each of those present. "Starting today, we will implement significant changes. First, all discriminatory policies are annulled. Second, we will initiate an intensive diversity and inclusion training program for all staff, from management to the cleaning personnel." Jason Sanders, who had remained silent, dared to look up. "Mrs. Montgomery, I would like to offer my sincere apologies. I understand that my behavior was unacceptable, and I am prepared to face the consequences." Louise observed him carefully. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Sanders. However, what happened yesterday is not just your responsibility. It's a reflection of a systemic problem that we must address." She turned to the rest of the team. "Which brings me to the third change. From today, I will be much more visible as the leader of this company. For years I avoided cameras, interviews, even inaugurations, convinced that my image was not adequate to represent a luxury chain. That time is over." Edward leaned forward. "Louise, I respect your decision, but from a marketing perspective, we must carefully consider how we handle the public image of the brand. Our investors have very clear expectations about the exclusive positioning of Emerald Hotels." Louise smiled, a smile that for the first time contained a hint of sadness. "Do you know why I named this chain Emerald, Edward? Not just for the color of the sea on this coast. My grandmother Emerald, an illiterate woman with a robust build like mine, worked all her life cleaning rooms in hotels where she would never have been able to stay. She taught me that true luxury is treating everyone with dignity She finally took a seat. Those who do not share this vision are free to seek other professional horizons. The meeting continued with technical details about the changes to be implemented. At the conclusion, as the directors were leaving the room, Edward approached Louise. "This won't end well," he murmured, quietly enough for only her to hear. "Investors aren't interested in social activism. They're interested in investment returns." Louise maintained her serene smile. "Then perhaps it's time to reevaluate who we do business with, Edward." The tension between them was palpable, but it was interrupted by the entrance of Melissa, the young employee who had witnessed the incident the day before. "Excuse me, Mrs. Montgomery. There are journalists at the main entrance. They're requesting a statement about what happened." Edward looked at Louise with evident concern. "Our public relations team can handle this. You don't need to expose yourself." Louise calmly gathered her documents. "On the contrary, Edward, that's exactly what I need to do." A few minutes later, Louise was in front of a small group of journalists in the elegant lobby of the hotel. The cameras focused on her figure as she, with a genuine smile, began to speak. "Good afternoon. I am Louise Montgomery, founder and owner of Emerald Hotels. Yesterday I experienced firsthand what many of our guests might have suffered, discrimination based solely on my physical appearance." The cameras recorded every word, every gesture. For the first time in 2 decades, Louise Montgomery wasn't hiding from the public light. This incident, though painful, has been a wake-up call. It has reminded us of the original mission of Emerald Hotels, to create spaces where everyone, regardless of their appearance, origin, or condition, is treated with the same respect and dignity. As she spoke, in an office on the top floor, Edward Foster watched the live broadcast with a furrowed brow. Next to him on his computer screen, he had an email draft open addressed to the main minority shareholders. The subject, urgent concerns about the new direction of the company. In his room, Jason Sanders was also following the press conference, with a mixture of admiration and shame. Next to him, on the bed, was his resignation letter already drafted. However, something in Louise's words, in her dignity, and her lack of resentment was beginning to make him question whether leaving was really the solution. And in New York City, in a luxurious apartment overlooking Central Park, a young woman watched the same broadcast with tears in her eyes. It was Catherine Montgomery, Louise's only daughter, who had distanced herself from her mother for years, embarrassed by her appearance and her refusal to improve her image. Now, seeing her face the press with such dignity, something was beginning to change inside her. She took her phone and, after hesitating for a moment, dialed the number she had avoided for more than 2 years. What none of them could foresee was how that simple press conference would trigger a series of events that would transform not only Emerald Hotels, but the lives of all involved, revealing deeply guarded secrets and testing loyalties that seemed unbreakable. 2 weeks after the pool incident, Louise's office in New York City had transformed into a center of frantic activity. The walls, previously decorated with discreet paintings of American landscapes, now displayed large boards with strategic plans, training schedules, and press clippings. In one corner, a team of designers worked on the new advertising campaign for Emerald Hotels, whose slogan, "True Luxury is Dignity," had been Louise's personal idea. The video of the incident, far from damaging the hotel's reputation as many feared, had generated an unexpected wave of support. Thousands of people shared their own experiences of discrimination in luxury establishments, and several American celebrities publicly expressed their support for Louise's stance. However, not all the news was good. Seated at her desk, Louise reviewed the latest financial report with a furrowed brow. Sarah, who accompanied her in all her important meetings, noticed her concern. "The numbers don't lie, do they?" commented Louise, pointing to a descending graph. "We've lost 15% of our premium reservations for the next quarter, and 3 corporate groups have cancelled their annual conventions." Sarah nodded. It was predictable. Their clients, that Edward personally cultivated, traditional companies that value exclusivity above all else. She sat in front of Louise. The good news is that general reservations have increased by 20%. People who had never considered staying at a luxury hotel now see us as an option. Louise smiled slightly. It's a start, but we need to balance our finances quickly if we want to maintain operational independence. The intercom sounded, interrupting the conversation. Mrs. Montgomery, Elite Traveler magazine is here for the interview and photo session, announced her assistant. Louise took a deep breath. This would be her first formal interview for a luxury magazine, part of her new visibility strategy. Have them come in 10 minutes, please. When the magazine team entered the office, Louise greeted them with genuine cordiality. The interview proceeded pleasantly until it was time for the photo session. Lucy Martinez, the fashion editor, reviewed the clothes they had brought for Louise with an expression of mild disgust. Mrs. Montgomery, we've selected these outfits that stylize the figure and are very flattering for the camera, she explained, showing a series of black dresses with strategic cuts. And our digital retouching team can work wonders afterward, don't worry. Louise's smile tensed slightly. Digital retouching? Lucy nodded naturally. It's customary. We can stylize your silhouette, soften imperfections. No one appears on our cover without these adjustments. Louise observed the dresses and then the editor. In a calm but firm voice she responded, I appreciate your consideration, but I prefer to wear my own clothes and appear exactly as I am, without retouching. The editor exchanged uncomfortable looks with the photographer. Mrs. Montgomery, I understand your position, but Elite Traveler has certain aesthetic standards that we maintain in all our publications. Our readers expect a level of perfection. And my real body doesn't meet that level of perfection, asked Louise, maintaining her friendly but incisive tone. I propose something. Let's do the session as I am. If you're not satisfied with the result, you can cancel the publication. I won't charge you for the advertising space we had agreed upon. After a tense silence, the photo session proceeded according to Louise's terms. 2 days later, she received a call from Lucy Martinez. The magazine had decided to cancel the article. I'm sorry, Mrs. Montgomery, but our editorial board considers that your image doesn't align with the aesthetics of our publication. Far from feeling defeated, Louise made a decision that would surprise the entire tourism industry in America. She wrote an open letter about her experience with the magazine, explaining frankly but without aggression how the rejection of her real body image reflected a broader problem in society. She published it on all of Emerald Hotel's social media, along with the unretouched photographs from the session, showing her proud in a beautiful red dress that highlighted her curves. True luxury is not measured in sizes, but in authenticity. The letter concluded. The publication went viral within hours. Thousands of women began to share their own experiences with weight discrimination, using the hashtag #TrueLuxury. Journalists from international media contacted Louise for interviews. Her story was beginning to transcend borders, becoming a symbol of resistance against oppressive beauty standards. In the midst of this media whirlwind, something unexpected happened. One morning, while Louise was having breakfast at the restaurant of the hotel in Palm Beach, a young woman approached. Her table. Mom, she said simply. Louise looked up, surprised. Standing before her was Catherine, her only daughter with whom she had lost contact more than 2 years ago. At 25, Catherine was physically very different from her mother, thin, tall, with blonde dyed hair and a style that denoted her profession as a fashion influencer. Their estrangement had begun when Catherine, after graduating in marketing, got a job at a prestigious advertising agency. Gradually, she began to be embarrassed by her mother's appearance, to the point of inventing excuses not to introduce her to her colleagues or avoiding being photographed with her. Catherine, Louise responded, with a mixture of joy and caution. What a surprise to see you here. The young woman sat down without waiting for an invitation. I saw your letter and the photos. Her eyes, identical to Louise's, reflected a mixture of contradictory emotions. I can't believe you did that. Show. Myself as I am? Louise asked gently. Catherine hesitated. Expose yourself like that. You know how people can be, how cruel they can be. She remained silent for a moment before adding, I've read the comments. Not all of them are positive. Louise smiled tenderly. They never are, honey, but I'm no longer interested in pleasing. Those who believe my value as a person is determined by my size. She extended her hand across the table but didn't touch her daughter's. What matters to me is being able to look in the mirror and recognize the woman my grandmother Emerald raised to be strong and dignified, regardless of the circumstances. Something in those words seemed to touch a sensitive fiber in Catherine. Her eyes moistened slightly. I've been working with Edward, she finally confessed. He hired me as an image consultant for the new campaign he was planning for the hotels, a campaign that, well, that was going in a completely opposite direction to yours. Louise showed no surprise. Deep down, she had always suspected that Edward would try to use her daughter against her. And now, she simply asked. Catherine played with the napkin. I resigned yesterday. After seeing your letter and the photos, I realized I was being part of the problem, not the solution. It was a beginning, a small step toward reconciliation, but the conversation was interrupted by the hurried arrival of Melissa, who now served as Louise's personal assistant. Mrs. Montgomery, excuse the interruption, but we need you to come immediately to the boardroom. Something serious has happened. In the boardroom, Sarah and the company's legal team waited with grim expressions. On the main screen was projected a document with the official letterhead of the Hotel Investors Association of America. Edward has called an extraordinary meeting of the board of shareholders, explained Sarah. He has gathered the support of almost all the minority shareholders to force a vote on your continuance as CEO of the company. Louise carefully read the document. His argument is that my recent decisions have compromised the financial viability and brand image of the company, she quoted in a calm voice, and that my focus on social activism over financial results constitutes a violation of my fiduciary duty. She looked at her legal team. Can he do this? Richard Vega, the company's lead lawyer, nodded gravely. Technically, yes. Although, you are the majority shareholder with 60%. The bylaws allow a coalition of minority shareholders representing more than 25% to request a management evaluation. Edward has managed to gather 32%. Catherine, who had followed her mother to the meeting, unexpectedly intervened. I can help. I know all of Edward's plans. He's been preparing this for months, long before the pool incident. He has a complete plan to reposition the hotels as ultra-exclusive spaces, gradually eliminating all the inclusion programs you implemented. Everyone looked at her in surprise. Louise felt a mixture of pride in the determination she saw in her daughter's eyes and sadness for the time lost between them. Thank you, Catherine. But we won't fight with the same weapons as Edward. We're not going to use privileged information or disloyal tactics. She turned to Sarah. When is the meeting scheduled? In 3 days, at the Emerald Hotel in New York City. Louise nodded. With determination. Perfect. We have work to do. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of activity. While the legal team prepared the formal defense, Louise initiated an internal audit that revealed something deeply disturbing. For the last 6 months, discriminatory policies had been implemented not only in the selection of clients, but also in the hiring of staff. They discovered documents showing how Edward had ordered human resources to discard applications based on physical appearance, age, and ethnic origin, especially for visible positions such as reception, customer service, and restaurants. This is a direct violation of our fundamental policies and American labor law, said Louise during an emergency meeting. And we have evidence that these changes were implemented without my knowledge or approval. With this information, the legal team prepared a counterattack, but Louise insisted that her main strategy would not be to attack Edward, but to defend the original vision of Emerald Hotels and demonstrate that inclusion was not only ethically right, but also financially viable. The night before the decisive meeting, while reviewing the final details of her presentation, Louise received an unexpected visit to her office. It was Jason Sanders, the manager who had starred in the pool incident. After that day, He had been reassigned to an intensive diversity and inclusion training program, instead of being fired as many expected. "Mrs. Montgomery, I know it's late, but I needed to talk to you before tomorrow," he said, with evident nervousness. "I've heard about the meeting with the shareholders and I want to help." Louise invited him to take a seat, intrigued by his offer. "Edward contacted me," continued Jason. "He offered me a position as regional director if I testified tomorrow that you have generated a hostile work environment for those who don't share your vision on inclusion." His confession surprised Louise, not so much for Edward's tactic, which she already expected something like this, but for Jason's honesty. "And what do you plan to do?" she asked with genuine curiosity. Jason looked her directly in the eyes, something he hadn't done since the incident. "I'm going to tell the truth, that these weeks in the training program have profoundly changed how I see the world, that I've realized my own prejudices and how they have affected my interactions with others," he paused, "and that you, by giving me this opportunity to learn instead of simply firing me, demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership this company needs." When Jason left, Louise remained for a long time contemplating the night view of New York City from her window. The next day would define not only her personal future, but that of everything she had built over 2 decades. But for the first time in a long time, she felt completely at peace with who she was and with the decisions she had made. What she couldn't imagine was that the shareholders' meeting would bring even more surprising revelations, long-kept secrets, that would forever change the history of Emerald Hotels and everyone involved in it. The Manhattan Ballroom of the Emerald Hotel in New York City, normally reserved for weddings and high-level corporate events, had been adapted for the extraordinary shareholders' meeting. The long tables formed a perfect rectangle in whose center stood a podium, with the hotel chain's logo, a stylized letter E in emerald green on a gold background. The seats, labeled with the names of each shareholder and the percentage of their participation, visually reflected the distribution of power within the company. On one side, the imposing presidential chair reserved for Louise with her 60% of the shares. At the opposite end, Edward Foster's place with 15%. The rest of the space was occupied by minority shareholders, a diverse group that included institutional investors and former partners who had supported Louise in the early days of her hotel empire. At 10 o'clock sharp, the doors to the ballroom opened. Edward Foster entered first, impeccably dressed in a custom-made navy blue suit. He was followed by an entourage of advisors and lawyers, all with serious expressions and folders overflowing with documents. He exchanged cordial but brief greetings with the other shareholders, projecting an image of absolute confidence. 10 minutes later, when almost all the attendees were already seated, Louise arrived. Contrary to what many expected, she wasn't. Dressed in the somber conservative colors typical of these meetings, she had chosen an elegant coral-colored skirt and jacket ensemble, complemented with American silver jewelry that had belonged to her grandmother, Emerald. She was accompanied by Sarah Watson, Richard Vega, and, to the surprise of many, Catherine, who sat right behind her mother with a determined expression. When Louise took her seat in the central position, the board secretary formally opened the session. "Good morning, everyone. This extraordinary meeting has been convened at the request of a group of minority shareholders represented by Mr. Edward Foster for the purpose of evaluating the current management of the General Director, Mrs. Louise Montgomery, and voting on her continuance in the position." The woman paused to take a sip of water. According to the company bylaws, although Mrs. Montgomery owns the majority shareholding, this motion must be heard and voted on when requested by shareholders representing more than 25% of the capital. We will proceed first with Mr. Foster's exposition of motives, followed by Mrs. Montgomery's response, and finally the vote. Edward approached the podium with a firm step. For the next 20 minutes, he presented a detailed analysis of what he called the financial and reputational deterioration of Emerald Hotels in recent weeks. With graphs and projections, he showed how cancellations by corporate clients and the loss of strategic alliances with other luxury companies could affect annual results. "What we are witnessing," he concluded in a solemn tone, is the subordination of our company's financial interests to a personal agenda of social activism. While we all respect Mrs. Montgomery's personal convictions, these should not compromise the future of a company in which we have all invested and trusted. He made a strategic pause, looking directly at Louise. Therefore, I request that this board consider a change in leadership that would allow Emerald Hotels to return to its path of excellence and exclusivity in the luxury hospitality market. Murmurs filled the room as Edward returned to his seat. The secretary then announced Louise's turn. Calmly, she rose and walked to the podium. She carried no notes or digital presentations. "Esteemed shareholders," she began in a clear, firm voice. 22 years ago, when we opened the first Emerald Hotel in Palm Beach, we defined our mission as creating spaces where luxury is measured by the quality of human treatment, not by exclusions. For more than 2 decades, this philosophy has allowed us to grow from a small family hotel to an internationally recognized chain. She paused, observing the attentive faces of those present. Contrary to what has been suggested, I am not imposing a new vision. I am defending the founding values of this company, values that some seem to have forgotten. At that moment, Richard Vega distributed a folder to each attendee. What you have before you is an independent audit of the policies implemented in the last 6 months without my knowledge or approval, policies that directly contradict our mission and, more worryingly, violate fundamental labor laws of our country. The shareholders began to review the documents with expressions of growing surprise. The evidence was compelling. Emails, internal directives, even recordings of meetings where staff were instructed to discriminate, both in hiring and in the treatment of certain clients. It's true that in recent weeks, we have lost some corporate alliances and certain regular clients, continued Louise. What Mr. Foster doesn't mention is that simultaneously, we have experienced a 23% increase in general reservations and a 40% increase in positive brand visibility on social networks, which translates to an estimated advertising value of more than $15 million. Sarah approached the podium and handed Louise a tablet. "And this," she said, showing the screen to the audience, "is something we received this morning. The International Association of Inclusive Tourism has selected us as the venue for their annual conference, an event that will attract more than 500 high-level executives from the global tourism industry. The direct economic value of this event exceeds $5 million. The murmuring in the room increased. Louise continued, "I am not sacrificing financial results for a social cause. I am demonstrating that genuine inclusion is not only ethically correct but commercially intelligent in a world where consumers, especially new generations, increasingly value the authenticity and social responsibility of the brands they engage with." Her gaze traveled across the table until it stopped on Edward, who maintained a neutral expression, but whose tension was evident from the rigidity of his posture. "However, there is something more important that I must share with you today." She signaled to Sarah, who delivered a sealed envelope to the board secretary. "This document certifies that, as the majority shareholder, I have decided to exercise my right to buy the participation of those shareholders who do not share the original vision of this company." Absolute silence fell over the room. "I have secured financing to acquire up to an additional 30% of the shares at a premium price of 15% above their current market value. This offer will be valid for 30 days and is completely voluntary." Edward stood up abruptly. "This is a maneuver to avoid the vote. I demand that we proceed as agreed." The board secretary, visibly uncomfortable, briefly consulted with the legal advisor present. "Mrs. Montgomery's offer is completely legal and does not interfere with the voting process scheduled for today," she finally ruled. Louise resumed speaking. "I'm not avoiding anything, Edward. The vote will proceed as planned. I simply want everyone to be clear that, regardless of the outcome, I am committed to preserving the fundamental values of Emerald Hotels. Those who do not share this vision now have a dignified opportunity to withdraw." The tension in the atmosphere was palpable. It was then that something unexpected happened. The door to the ballroom opened, and Melissa, the young employee who had witnessed the original incident at the pool, entered accompanied by Jason Sanders and a group of approximately 20 employees from various departments of the hotel. "Excuse the interruption," said Melissa with a trembling but determined voice. "The employees of Emerald Hotels request a few minutes to share something important with the shareholders." The secretary looked at Louise, who seemed as surprised as the rest. After a moment of hesitation, she nodded. "Go ahead." Melissa advanced to the center of the room. "My name is Melissa Rodriguez. I've worked at Emerald Hotels for 5 years. I started as a housekeeper, and now I'm an executive assistant, thanks to the professional development program that Mrs. Montgomery implemented." She took a deep breath before continuing. "What none of you know is that on the day of the pool incident, I was there because I had been suffering harassment for weeks from a supervisor who told me I was too ethnic to work in visible areas of the hotel." The murmurs intensified. Melissa continued. "This supervisor was hired during last year's expansion and was part of the new team that Mr. Foster brought with him. When I saw how they treated Mrs. Montgomery because of her appearance, I understood that the problem was systemic." Jason Sanders stepped forward. "I was the one who tried to expel Mrs. Montgomery from the pool. I acted following guidelines I received during my training, where we were instructed to maintain an exclusive environment and discreetly manage the presence of disruptive elements. At no time was I informed that these policies contradicted the original philosophy of the company." One by one, the employees present shared similar experiences, stories of subtle and not so subtle discrimination, of policies that had begun to change the work environment, but also stories of how Louise's intervention had begun to correct the course. A chef of Native American origin spoke of how he had been relegated to invisible tasks until Louise, upon discovering him, recognized his talent and promoted him to cold kitchen chef. An older receptionist told how she had been scheduled exclusively for night shifts until the recent restructuring that promoted diversity at all hours. Edward observed with an increasingly somber expression. When the testimonies concluded, Louise resumed speaking. "I didn't organize this," she clarified, "but I deeply appreciate the courage of each of you in sharing your experiences." She turned to the shareholders. "What you've heard reflects exactly what's at stake today, not just my position as CEO, but the soul of this company." The board secretary, visibly moved, announced that they would proceed with the vote. Against all odds, the employees requested to remain as witnesses. "After all," said Melissa, "the outcome will affect our future as much as yours." The vote was nominal. One by one, the shareholders expressed their decision. To the surprise of many, several of those who had initially supported Edward's motion changed their position after hearing the testimonies and reviewing the documentation presented. When it came to Edward's own turn, he found himself in an impossible position. With a gesture of barely contained frustration, he declared, "Abstention." The final result was decisive, 78% in favor of Louise's continuity, 7% against, 15% abstentions. The motion had been defeated by an overwhelming margin. As the shareholders began to disperse, Edward approached Louise. "This isn't over," he murmured. "You've won a battle, not the war." Louise held his gaze without hostility. "It was never a war, Edward. And my offer still stands. Maybe it's time for you to consider whether this is really the business project you want to continue being associated with." Before Edward could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of an older man, elegantly dressed, who had remained silent throughout the meeting. It was Henry Wilson, one of the founding shareholders and an old friend of Louise's father. "Impressive meeting," he commented with a smile. "It reminded me why I invested in this company so many years ago." He turned to Edward. "You know, young man, I've always admired your ambition and your business intelligence. But today you've deeply disappointed me." Edward's face tensed. Henry continued, "When my wife, who weighed more than 200 pounds, was humiliated at a hotel in Atlantic City 30 years ago, I swore I would never invest in a business that practiced that kind of discrimination. That's why I supported Louise from the beginning, because she shared that vision." "Times change, Henry," Edward responded coldly. "The luxury market has certain expectations." The old man smiled enigmatically. "Indeed, times do change. And it seems they've changed in a direction you hadn't foreseen." He paused. "By the way, I've just decided to accept Louise's offer. I'll sell my shares to her, not to you." This last phrase caused Edward to visibly pale. "How do you know that?" "That you've been contacting minority shareholders for weeks, offering to buy their stakes to increase your control," Henry completed. "This business world is smaller than you think, young man." With one last meaningful look, the old man walked away, leaving Edward visibly shaken. Meanwhile, in another part of the room, Catherine approached her mother. "You were incredible," she said, with genuine admiration. "All my life I've been wrong about you, about what it really means to be strong." Louise took her daughter's hands in hers. "It's never too late to rediscover ourselves, darling." That night in the presidential suite of the hotel, Louise contemplated the lights of New York City while reflecting on the day's events. The battle had been won, but she knew the challenges would continue. However, for the first time in a long time, she felt that she would not face these challenges alone. She had her daughter back, a loyal team, and employees who believed in her vision. The sound of her phone interrupted her thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number. "Mrs. Montgomery, I am a representative of Mediterranean International Chains. We are interested in discussing a possible strategic alliance with Emerald Hotels. Our CEO has followed with interest your recent positioning on inclusion and diversity, values that we share. Could we arrange a meeting?" Louise smiled. The doors that some predicted would close were beginning to open, and more importantly, they were opening for the right reasons. What she couldn't imagine was that this potential alliance would bring with it unexpected revelations and connections to her past that would forever change her understanding of her own history and that of her family. 6 months had passed since the historic shareholders' meeting. The Emerald Hotel in Miami gleamed under the Caribbean sun as it prepared for an unprecedented event. The inauguration of the first Pavilion of Dignity, a space specifically designed to promote inclusive tourism with facilities adapted for people of all builds, ages, and physical abilities. The lobby bustled with activity. Journalists from national and international media crowded in front of the area designated for the press conference. Representatives of the tourism industry conversed animatedly, intrigued by this new concept that was beginning to generate interest throughout the sector. Louise observed the preparations from the balcony of her suite, remembering the dizzying path traveled in these months. After her victory at the shareholders' meeting, multiple changes had shaken the foundations of Emerald Hotels. The first and most significant, Edward Foster, had finally accepted her purchase offer, selling all of his shares and completely dissociating himself from the company. His departure, far from destabilizing the organization as many feared, had allowed for a profound restructuring, aligned with the original values. The second major change had been Catherine's incorporation into the management team. After months of reconciliation and deep conversations with her mother, the young woman had decided to put her digital marketing experience at the service of the company's new vision. Her fresh perspective, combined with Louise's deep knowledge of the industry, was proving to be an explosively creative mix. "Ready for the big moment?" asked Sarah, entering the suite in an elegant emerald green dress. After so many years as Louise's right-hand woman, the 60-year-old woman, had finally been named Deputy General Director, allowing Louise to focus on strategic vision while Sarah managed daily operations. "As ready as one can be," responded Louise with a smile, adjusting the details of her outfit. A silk ensemble in turquoise tones specially designed for her by a renowned American designer who had decided to launch an inclusive fashion line inspired by Louise's story. "Have the special guests arrived?" Sarah nodded. "All of them, including Alexandra Conti, the CEO of Mediterranean International Chains. She seems very enthusiastic about the possible alliance." The mention of that name made Louise feel a tingle of anticipation. After months of negotiations, today she would finally meet in person the mysterious Italian businesswoman who ran one of the most prestigious hotel groups in Europe and who had shown so much interest in partnering with Emerald Hotels precisely because of its new inclusive philosophy. When Louise descended to the event area, She was greeted by spontaneous applause from the employees who saw her pass. Many of them were new hires, a result of the innovative Talents Without Labels program, which prioritized skills and service, attitude above candidates' physical appearance or social origin. Among the crowd, she distinguished Melissa, now promoted to Customer Experience Coordinator, and Jason Sanders, who, after completing his training process, had been reassigned as head of the new Department of Inclusion and Diversity, using his own transformation experience to sensitize the staff. The press conference proceeded smoothly. Louise, accompanied by Catherine and the management team, officially presented the Pavilion of Dignity and the preliminary results of the new business strategy. A 35% increase in general occupancy, an expansion of the demographic profile of their guests, and contrary to all negative forecasts, an 18% increase in the chain's global revenue. What these numbers demonstrate, she concluded in a firm voice, is that inclusion is not only ethically correct, but commercially intelligent. We are attracting a sector of the market that has been ignored for too long by the luxury industry. Real people, with real bodies who deserve extraordinary experiences, without feeling judged or excluded. Questions from journalists were diverse, some skeptical, others enthusiastic. Louise responded to all with the same combination of honesty and determination that had become her personal trademark. When the formal part concluded, the reception began. It was then that Catherine approached, accompanied by an elegant woman of approximately 50 years, perfectly cut silver hair in a bob and penetrating green eyes. "Mum, I want to introduce you to Alexandra Conti, CEO of Mediterranean International Chains." Louise extended her hand, but Alexandra surprised her with a warm hug, Italian style. "Finally we meet in person. I've followed your career with great admiration, Louise." Her English had a charming Italian accent. "Your courage in defending. Your principles reminded me why I entered this business in the first place." As they conversed, Louise couldn't help but feel a strange familiarity with Alexandra, as if she knew her from somewhere. The Italian businesswoman guided her to a quieter terrace, away from the bustle of the reception. "There's something important I must tell you," said Alexandra once they were alone. "Something that explains my personal interest in forming an alliance with you, beyond the evident commercial advantages." Louise looked at her with curiosity. "I'm listening." Alexandra took a deep breath. "Do you know the story of the Bella Vista Hotel in Sorrento, Italy?" Louise frowned, trying to remember. "Vaguely. It was a very prestigious family hotel that went bankrupt about 30 years ago." Alexandra nodded. 32, to be exact. It was my family's hotel. I had just graduated in hotel management and was ready to join the business when the disaster occurred. She paused as if. The following words were difficult to pronounce. The hotel went bankrupt because my father, who was running it then, made a series of disastrous decisions based on prejudices. He fired our head chef because he had gained weight after an illness. He rejected $1 million contract with a plus-size modeling agency. And worst of all, he publicly humiliated a guest, a very influential food critic, because he considered that her appearance did not correspond with the Bella Vista standard. The story was painfully familiar to Louise. "That critic published a devastating review," continued Alexandra, "but what was really damaging was that she revealed the toxic culture my father had created. In a matter of months, we lost our reputation, our clientele, and finally the hotel." Louise was beginning to understand the connection. "So when you saw my story?" "I saw the opportunity to redeem my family's legacy," Alexandra completed. "After losing the Bella Vista, I swore that someday I would create a hotel chain based on completely opposite principles. It took me decades, but Mediterranean Chains has become what it is today because I learned from my father's mistakes." She took Louise's hands in hers. "When I saw you face exactly the kind of prejudices that destroyed my family, but from the right side of history, I knew we had to work together." That conversation marked the beginning of an alliance that would transform the international hotel industry. Under the name Human Hospitality, Emerald Hotels and Mediterranean chains developed a certification standard that soon began to be adopted by independent establishments worldwide. The seal guaranteed not only facilities adapted for various body types and needs, but also inclusive hiring policies and a commitment to the dignity of all people. News of this alliance generated a wave of reactions, not all positive. Some traditional competitors ridiculed the initiative, predicting its failure. However, the public response was overwhelmingly favorable. Reservations at both chains increased significantly, and other companies began to show interest in obtaining the Human Hospitality certification. In the midst of this professional transformation, Louise was also experiencing a profound personal evolution. Her relationship with Catherine had flourished beyond the initial reconciliation. Both discovered that, despite their physical differences, they shared a determination and a worldview that were surprisingly similar. Together, they created a mentoring program for young women interested in the hotel industry, with special emphasis on candidates from diverse backgrounds and unconventional appearances. One afternoon, while reviewing applications for this program in Louise's office in Palm Beach, Catherine received a message that made her turn pale. "What's wrong?" asked Louise, immediately noticing the change in her daughter's expression. Catherine showed her the screen of her phone. It was an article from a blog specializing in the hotel industry, titled "The False Revolutionary: The Truth Behind Louise Montgomery." The text, signed by a critic known to be hostile to inclusion initiatives, included cruel mockery about Louise's physical appearance and questioned the authenticity of her commitment to the cause, suggesting that it was all a marketing strategy. "It's horrible," murmured Catherine. "How can they allow something like this to be published?" To her surprise, Louise smiled serenely. "A year ago, this type of article would have devastated me. Today, I see it as a sign that we are causing enough impact to make those who resist change uncomfortable." She took her tablet and began to draft a response. "What are you doing?" asked Catherine. "Responding with dignity," answered Louise, "without personally attacking the author, but making our position clear." The response, published that same night on the official social media of Emerald Hotels, was an open letter titled "True Luxury," letter to those who still don't understand. With elegance and firmness, Louise reaffirmed her commitment to inclusion, invited the critic to personally visit the facilities of the Pavilion of Dignity, and concluded with a reflection on how true changes always face initial resistance. The letter went viral. Thousands of people shared their own experiences of discrimination in luxury establishments using the hashtag #OneTrueLuxury. Celebrities and public figures joined the movement. The critic who had written the original article was forced to issue a public apology in the face of social pressure. This episode, far from damaging Louise's image, catapulted her profile even further as a purposeful business leader. Business magazines that had previously ignored her now requested interviews. She was invited to give lectures at prestigious universities and international events. The impact of her story transcended the hotel sphere, inspiring changes in other traditionally exclusive industries. Approximately 1 year after the inauguration of the Pavilion of Dignity, while Emerald Hotels celebrated the opening of its 10th property, this time in Charleston, South Carolina, Louise received an unexpected request. Edward Foster, who had completely disappeared from the radar after selling his shares, was asking for a private meeting. With some apprehension but genuine curiosity, Louise agreed. The meeting took place in a discreet cafe in New York City. Edward, who had always been the living image of the impeccable executive, showed a remarkably different appearance. He was dressed simply and seemed to have lost weight, but the most significant change was in his eyes. The usual hardness had been replaced by a softer, almost vulnerable expression. "I appreciate your agreeing to see me," he began, evidently nervous. "I know I have no right to ask for your time after everything that happened." Louise observed him with interest. Curiosity won over resentment, she admitted with a small smile. "What did you want to talk to me about, Edward?" He took a sip of his coffee before answering. "Many things, actually, but mainly I wanted to apologize, not just for the pool incident or for the shareholders' meeting, but for years of actions based on wrong values. He seemed sincere, which surprised Louise. Edward had always been a master of manipulation. "What has led you to this reflection?" she asked, genuinely intrigued. Edward remained silent for a moment. "Life has interesting ways of teaching us lessons," he finally said. "After selling my shares, I invested in other hotel projects with the exclusive approach I so defended. It seemed to be going well until—" he paused. "Until I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. It's not fatal, but it has changed my body. I've gained weight due to medications, developed skin problems, and suddenly I began to experience the kind of looks and comments I always considered normal when directed at others." Louise nodded, understanding perfectly what he meant. "It's a different perspective when you're on the other side, isn't it?" "Completely," acknowledged Edward. "The worst was realizing how my own business partners began to subtly exclude me from social events, to cancel meetings, the same tactics I used before." Louise felt no joy in his situation, but rather a strange empathy. "And what will you do now?" Edward smiled slightly. "I've sold most of my stakes in other businesses. I'm redefining my path." He paused. "In fact, I've begun working with a foundation that supports people with autoimmune diseases, especially those facing workplace discrimination due to the physical changes caused by their conditions." Louise looked at him with renewed respect. "That's surprisingly admirable, Edward." "I'm not seeking your admiration," he clarified. "I just wanted you to know that, although late, I understood the lesson. And also—" he hesitated for a moment. "I wanted to know if you would consider allowing me to collaborate in some way with the Human Hospitality Initiative. Not as a partner or in a position of power, of course. Perhaps as an external consultant or in some role where I can contribute from my new perspective." The proposal took Louise by surprise. She would never have imagined this turn in the story. After reflecting for a moment, she responded, "I can't promise you anything right now. I need to consult with the team, especially with those who were directly affected by your previous policies." Edward nodded, understanding. "That's fair. I didn't expect an immediate answer." He stood up to leave, but before added, "Regardless of your decision, I want you to know that I admire you, Louise, not only for your business success, but for your integrity, for not letting the world change you, but changing the world yourself." 2. Months after that conversation, Edward Foster joined the Leaders in Transformation program at Emerald Hotels, not as an executive, but as a facilitator in awareness workshops for high-level executives in the hotel industry. His personal transformation story proved to be a powerful tool to reach those who, like him in the past, considered inclusion a passing fad or a superficial marketing strategy. The third anniversary of the pool incident was commemorated with the creation of the Emerald Foundation, dedicated to promoting inclusion and combating discrimination in all its forms. At the inaugural ceremony, held at the original hotel in Palm Beach, Louise shared the stage with Melissa, who now directed the professional development program for employees, and with Jason Sanders, who had become a respected diversity consultant. "If this journey has taught us anything," said Louise to a packed auditorium, "it's that genuine transformation is possible, not only in business policies or physical facilities, but in the hearts and minds of people." She looked around at the diverse faces that made up her team, at her daughter Catherine, at Alexandra Conti, who had flown from Italy for the occasion, even at Edward, seated discreetly in one of the last rows. "We have demonstrated that true luxury is not measured in exclusions, but in inclusions. That dignity is not a privilege reserved for those who fit certain standards, but a fundamental right of all human beings." As the audience applauded, Louise silently reflected on the long road traveled. From that morning at the pool, when she dared to defend her right to exist in the space she herself had created, to this moment when her personal vision had become a global movement. The transformation had never been about revenge, but about evolution. Not about exclusion, but about expansion. Not about rejection, but about redemption. And as she observed the hotel she had built with so much effort, now transformed into a symbol of a new paradigm in the industry, Louise Montgomery knew with certainty that the cycle had been completed, that every challenge, every obstacle, every moment of vulnerability had been worth it. Because true success, as her grandmother Emerald had taught her so many years ago, was not measured in dollars or prestige, but in how many lives you touched, in how many doors you opened for others. And in that sense, her legacy was just beginning to flourish. Dear listeners, we hope that Louise Montgomery's story has moved and inspired you. This tale of dignity, transformation, and redemption reminds us that a person's true value should never be measured by their physical appearance, but by their heart, their actions, and their ability to generate positive changes in the world. 2. Continue this emotional journey. We've prepared a special list with equally captivating stories about people who defied stereotypes and changed their industries forever. Find it here by clicking to your left. If you like this story of overcoming and transformation, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life, the challenges we face, and the human capacity to evolve and grow even in the most adverse circumstances. Did you find Louise's determination inspiring? Or perhaps you identified with Edward's transformation, or the reconciliation between mother and daughter. We'd love to know your impressions and personal experiences in the comments. Remember that these stories are not just to entertain us, but to remind us that each of us has the power to create more inclusive and respectful spaces in our own environment. As Louise Montgomery would say, true luxury is treating everyone with dignity. We'll see you tomorrow with a new story that will touch your heart. Until then, we wish you a day filled with compassion and authenticity.